Speaking of trust, I am rejoined now by Chloe Hadjimatheou, who you will recall, or if you don't, I will fill you in, as the journalist with The Observer who has been digging into this extraordinary backstory to one of the most successful literary events of the last few years, The Salt Path, a tale of triumph over adversity, of battling misery and prevailing, but which, as Chloe has previously established, the truth of which appeared to be very different from what had been presented to readers. Do you want to give us a quick, as if this were an episode of Quantum Leap or Dallas? Actually, let me just bring that up to date for younger viewers, as if this were an episode of Succession or Industry. Do you want to just remind us of the story so far, Chloe? It's lovely to see you.
Good to see you. Last time I was here, I was telling you that I had discovered that the origin story in The Salt Path essentially tells the story of Raynor Winn and her husband Moth, and how they lost their home in Wales because they were conned out of it by a friend of theirs in a dodgy business deal. And then within a week, they'd found out that Moth had a degenerative, fatal neurological disease. And they took this extraordinary decision to walk the Southwest Coastal Path, during which nature, the walk itself, and their kind of love for each other had this incredible impact on his condition and sort of reversed his symptoms. And she went on to write 2 further books, which were also top of the Sunday Times bestseller list. And there's now been a movie about this. And last summer, I uncovered that the way in which they lost their house was not correct. What had actually happened was Raynor Winn, whose real name is Sally Walker, had been accused of stealing money from her employer, over $60,000 in Wales, back in 2008. She was arrested and then borrowed money against her home to repay her employer and essentially get out of a criminal investigation, and subsequently lost her home when she couldn't pay that loan off. There were also serious questions about Moth's condition and his claims and her claims that he could
not least
cure
from
it.
people with the same condition.
People with the same condition, and also neurologists who specialise in this very rare condition, claimed that they'd never seen anybody display the symptoms that he had, have the condition for as many years as he's had it, and be able to halt, let alone reverse the symptoms. That was last summer. Since then, I wrote an article in The Observer. Since then, I have been in touch with Raynor Winn's family and Moth's families, and they have even more stuff to tell. 4 members of each family have spoken to me, and the story that I have got is that, in fact, Raynor Winn and Moth were never destitute without anywhere to live. They did lose their home, but they were then taken in by family, and they lived with Raynor Winn's niece for about 18 months, during which they went on walking holidays, as people do. It seems they didn't walk the Southwest Coastal Path in the way in which they claimed in the book, but over a series of years during walking holidays, like most people do it. Also, the families claimed that Raynor Winn emptied the bank accounts of Moth's parents and her own mother. And her niece presented me with an apparent confession letter in which Raynor Winn admits stealing over £60,000 from her employer and stealing money from her husband's parents and leaving them with unable to pay their own rent, and also faking her mum's bank statements and stealing money from her own mum. I should say very quickly here that Raynor Winn has said on her website that she has not stolen any money and that she did not write a confession letter.
So she is essentially accusing her niece of forgery at this point.
She seems to be suggesting that members of her family have access to Grind and that The Observer has in some way incited some kind of family feud.
Why, I suppose, speaking to that point, why, when you speak to family members who must have watched, if everything they're telling you is true, they must have watched this saga unfold with a curious mixture of incredulity and abject horror. Why have they not come forward sooner?
That's a really good question, and it's one that lots of people ask me. And the way in which I respond to that and the way in which they've told me is that they've tried. Yeah. So her niece actually...
Where would you go?
Well, she Googled penguin and called some call centre and nobody took her seriously. She went to the police with this confession letter and they were like, didn't want to get into a family dispute. And so they have tried, but it's been some kind of mad gaslighting experience for them where they've watched somebody they know as Sally Walker take on this persona, Raynor Winn, and become a sort of national treasure.
So where do you go? What is the hotline that you ring to report?
Doesn't seem to be a mechanism.
Alleged bogusness on the part of of the national treasure. So this story just gets... I mean, you must be slightly surprised, having unearthed the original, what would we call it, apparent gap between the reality and what was being presented. It just gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
Well, I mean, this story came to me because a member of the public sort of approached me and said, I'm concerned that the way they're presenting this man's condition and his ability to reverse it...
So it was a medical story originally.
A medical story. And I just thought, people's medical histories are private. I wasn't sure how far I'd get. I had no idea I was going to sort of open the door to essentially what is an accusation of a gigantic heist and con.
We have contacted Sally Walker for comment. This is LBC speaking now, but we did not receive a response. There's a book as well. I mean, again, these moments where you'd have thought that a script editor might have, if you were putting this together as a work of fiction, a script editor might have occasion on... I think you're pushing the boundaries of plausibility now, Chloe. This self-published novel, I think we could probably leave that on the cutting room floor.
It's just mad. So... it turns out that Raynor Winn has always maintained that The Salt Path was an accidental book. She wrote it as a sort of notes for her husband so that he wouldn't forget their walk. She says it's the first thing she ever wrote and she never imagined she'd get it published. In fact, she self-published a novel years earlier, and this is really bizarre. This is a fictional account about a couple who buy a house in Wales. The wife steals money from her employer, flees the police, borrows against her house to repay the employer, and they lose their home in that way. Sound familiar?
Well, what you're suggesting here is that a work of fiction that she wrote is actually more accurate with regard to their shared history than the work of non-fiction that she claimed to have written.
It's bizarre. And for some reason, it seems that she was able to sort of approach the real damage she'd done, or I mean, I think this novel is actually an apology, a sort of excuse for what she's done. She tries to explain herself in this novel in some way, but she wasn't able to deal with it in a memoir of her real life. And I think the place that I reached is that Raynor Winn is an incredible creator. She's an author, but she's also created personalities. Raynor Winn and Moth, and she's created backstories for them, potentially the stories she wished they'd had.
I just find it endlessly fascinating. I'm not entirely sure why. Is it because the scale of the success was so enormous and the number of people that were buying into something more than a book? They were buying into redemption, they were buying into hope, they were buying into some of the purest of human emotions, have been so categorically misled and betrayed. That speaks to something quite primal, doesn't it?
I think so. I don't think you can really blame readers for wanting hope. The world's a bit of a miserable place these days, and so we get it wherever we can find it, right? But yes. I think, Raynor Winn didn't set out to scam anyone. You can't set out to create a best-selling novel, book. Yeah. This is something she stumbled across, but she went on to write a second and third. And I think really the questions are for Penguin, who haven't responded. They said they believe they did all due diligence in this case, but nobody asked any difficult questions when her stories became more and more outlandish with claims of Moth reversing his condition. And I think the message that this author received was that maybe truth isn't that important in memoir.
What will I get from your new podcast that I haven't already got from following your excellent journalism in The Observer, Chloe?
You will get a real human take on this. You'll go behind the scenes and hear people's stories in detail. You'll live it slowly as the investigation unravelled for me.
And you're not finished yet?
Well, I bloody hope I am, James.
I don't know. Imagine what might happen next.
I don't know if she's got any more skeletons in her closet. I hope not, because I'm moving on now. I've got other stories to do.
And have you had any meaningful contact from her?
I haven't.
Any back channel contact?
And it's a real shame because I've reached out to her, probably about a dozen times, requesting an interview, requesting a meeting, a conversation. And I think that's really what's missing from this story is Raynor's perspective on all this. I'd love to hear from her. So whether it's me or to someone else, it would be great to hear her side of these events.